Hey BookTube, I'm back for another video. So this video is going to continue my shelf tour, and the last three shelves we did were non-fiction shelves based on different historical periods that I'm interested in. This shelf here that I'm going to go through today is different because it is Greek and Roman classics, usually in Penguin Classics and Oxford World Classics editions, and they're all kind of mixed together on the shelf. And there's also going to be a discrepancy between books that I have read and ones that I haven't, because I read most of the Greek stuff and not a whole lot, or none, I think, of the Roman stuff. So it'll be a little bit of a discrepancy there, which will become evident right away. And I think I'll just start right away on the shelf. I have a lot of books on this shelf, a lot of huge stacks in front, and then a number of and then the shelf proper with some stacks on top of those. So I'll try to go through this fairly quickly. We don't need to be here for 45 minutes going through talking about every single one, but we start off with a volume of Plutarch by Penguin Classics. This is their Rise and Fall of Athens. This is their Greek Lives, which is the usual way that Penguin and Oxford like to publish their Plutarch. Just a thin little selection of some lives of Plutarch, even though the actual work is probably 6 times as long as this. And I believe, if you look it up, we're on our maybe 4th or 5th translation of Proust that's coming out. So if people somehow we can get modern translations of Proust a lot more readily now. Like I believe even Oxford is doing a translation of Proust all the way through. But with Plutarch, we only get this. So take what we can get and just move on. Next, we have the volume of Sallust. This is a Roman author. This has the Jugurthine War and the Conspiracy of Catiline. This is history, I think, unless was like a first-hand witness to these events, and yeah, I think he was a witness to some of these events, and then this is his account of 2 different events, and this is I think all we have by this author, and so it's translated and put into one volume. I don't know much more about it than that, other than it has something to do with Cicero. So Cicero was involved in at least the Catiline conspiracy. I don't know about the other one, and that's all I really know on that. Next, we start with I'll do this one here. This is Terence's The Comedies. This is one of the few surviving Roman playwrights that we have, and this has all of his works. I don't think we even know a whole lot about Terence himself, or if he was even considered like all that great in his day. But we do have his plays surviving. I think it's this is Roman comedy, and I don't know how many plays are actually in here. Let's see if I can find it here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it looks like 6 plays of his that we have surviving, and they're all in this one volume here. And I know Terence is fairly important in the history of just plays in general, because characters like Shakespeare were not going back to the ancient Greeks. They were going at ancient Romans, more like Terence and another Roman player, Terence, and another Roman playwright that we'll be getting to on this shelf. And then we have Apuleius's The Golden Ass. His one of the I think the only, or one of the few surviving sort of like narrative accounts in Roman times. It's tempting to call this a novel, but novel was obviously not a concept back then. It's a story of a character who's turned into a donkey, and then it has all things like it's fairly funny, or at least it's supposed to be. I have not read it myself, so I don't know how well that translates. And we also have lots of mythology in here. I think there's a certain mythological story that only appears in here. And this is a revised translation of Robert Graves. So this is Robert Graves' translation, but revised by Michael Grant. So, and that's important because I have more. I think I have at least 2 or 3 more translations of this on this shelf. So we'll see when we find those. And speaking of Robert Graves, we continue with Suetonius' 12 Lives, and this is the volume by Robert Graves. And then I don't believe this one has been revised at all. No. So this is just the Robert Graves translation from the 50s. And Suetonius' 12 Lives, he wrote 12 short biographies, or just, I don't know, accounts of 12 Roman emperors, and whether or not they're historically reliable or not is not really the point. The point is that they're fairly entertaining, and one of the few sources that we have for some of these emperors. So then we move on to Ovid's Metamorphoses. This is the Mary Innes translation, and it's done in prose, which is, I think, the only volume of this that I've ever seen that translates it into prose, considering Ovid is known as a poet, and so you turn his poetic epic into, or not really epic, but his poetic masterpiece into prose seems like a counterintuitive decision, but it's interesting. I have a number of translations of this work. I don't know if this will be the first one I go to when I read it for the first time. I'll just pull all of them down, the translations that I have, and give them a look and see which one agrees with me the most. And then we move on to the aforementioned Plautus. This is the other comedic playwright in the Roman times. This is not his entire works. This includes The Rope, The Ghost, the $3 Day, and Amphitryoia. I don't know, I'm butchering that, but it's got all those plays there. And this is translated by E.F. Waitling. And this is a collection of 4 of his plays. Then we move on to a character I had never actually heard of until I found this volume. This is Marcellinus, the Roman historian, and this is the later Roman Empire. And it's just a historical work from the period of 8354 to 8378. And I really don't know much beyond it, other than I know that Steve Donahue did a Daily Penguin video of this back in the day. And so if you look up Steve Donahue and this last name here, Marcellinus, you'll find his short talk of this one volume here. And that's really all I know about it. And then we go back to, well, this is actually not Suetonius, but this is this is inspired by Suetonius. This is Lives of the Later Caesars. Doesn't really have a author. What does it say? It says the first part of the Augustan history with newly compiled lives by Nerva and Trajan. So I'm not entirely sure how this volume was put together. If you know Roman history more than I do, which is not that hard to do, you'll know more about what's included in this volume. And safe to say that I intend to learn a lot more about Roman history by the time I get to these volumes, because I do have, if you actually saw one of my shelf tours, I showed off all my Roman history, so I'll be reading a lot of those. Then we move on to one of the major names I associate with Roman literature, and this is Cicero. This is his selected political speeches. And it's translated by Michael Grant, and it's just an anthology of, let's see how many here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Seven of his political speeches in this nice little volume here. One thing that I wish Penguin or Oxford would do this big fat anthology of the selected works of Cicero, or like the essential works of Cicero, because Cicero wrote a ton of works and a ton of letters and a ton of different tracts of different kinds and like philosophical texts and whatever, and then of course political speeches and different speeches of different kinds, and no one wants to put it into an anthology. I mean, there is a Penguin Classic anthology, but it's like 200 pages, and that's barely an anthology. This itself is at least 200 pages. So, if you can do 200 pages of his political speeches, then a 200-page anthology of the broad range of his literature is not going to show you very much. So I wish there was a volume of Cicero like 3 times the size that would have a more broader range of his works. And then we move on to another Roman historian. This is Tacitus, and this is the Annals of Imperial Rome, and this is also translated by Michael Grant. So, one of the more famous Roman historians in this Penguin Classic volume. Then we move on to a vein of Greek literature here. We start off with a signet classic of the Great Dialogues of Plato. And this is a translation by W.H.D. Rouse, this includes the Republic, the Apology, Crito, Phaedo, Ion, Meno, and Symposium. And I've only read the Symposium from this volume because the rest I either read in a different translation or I did not read it at all. I don't think I've read the Phaedo. Or no, that's not true. It's the Ion and the Meno that I have not read. The rest, the Republic, Apology, Crito, and Phaedo, I've read in other translations. And, of course, the Symposium is the volume that I read in this translation here, which I quite liked. I thought, and in fact, the Symposium is my favorite work of Plato's, as of this moment. Then we move to some Greek tragedy. So we have this 2-volume set here by Chicago University Press of the Greek tragedies, and they're edited by David Gren and Richard Lattimore, and it just includes a random selection of tragedies in each. Like this one here has 2 volumes of Aeschylus, 2 volumes of Sophocles, and then Euripides. And then this one here has 3 plays by Euripides and then 1 by Sophocles and Aeschylus. I don't know what the whole reason why they included certain ones, like just a random selection in each. And then the translations, of course, are not just done by the editors, but by a few other translators as well. There is a 3rd volume. I have that one as an ebook, but the ebook is actually an updated version done in like 2019 by different editors. So these are the original 2 volumes. And I read a few of the translations from here. The ones, usually, if I had one of these plays in a different translation, in a different edition, I read it in that version instead. Others here, like Euripides, the Trojan Women, Iphigenia in Tyrrhus, and I think that was it, actually. Or no. Yeah. Then I would read it in this volume. But the rest, like Sophocles and Aeschylus, I had in other volumes. So I didn't need to really consult these that much, which is good enough for me because I didn't actually like the translations that I read in here. I didn't think they were all that good, and they have no editorial material other than maybe a short introduction. So I kind of like having a little bit more critical apparatus with my ancient classics. And then speaking of tragedies, well, we're in a vein of tragedies now. This is my Norton Critical of Oedipus Tyrannus, which is also known as Oedipus the King, or Oedipus the Rex, or Oedipus Rex, sorry. And this is just a standalone Oxford Norton Classic. This is a Norton Critical, sorry. It is translated by, does it tell me the translator? Translated and edited by Lucy Berkowitz and Theodore Brunner. And the great thing about this edition is that the play itself is like The play itself is like 30 pages, and then this also combines with an introduction, and then the rest of this volume here is all either passages from ancient authors that maybe were inspirations for the tragedy, and then critical material and commentary throughout the ages. So for a volume like this, where the work itself is fairly small, you get a lot of extra material here, which is something I really like. It's a different story when you have, say, the Norton Critical of Don Quixote, where the work itself is like 900 pages, and then you have to fit in maybe an extra 150 pages of extra material. Here you have a lot of room to breathe in the kind of critical material that you bring in. And just another word, I did not read this translation. I read a different translation of Oedipus the Rex, or Oedipus Rex, sorry. And then we have Aeschylus. This is the Oresteia trilogy. This is the only surviving trilogy that we have of Greek tragedy, where they told their story of tragedy in 3 plays that would be portrayed across a festival day. So throughout the day, you'd be having different chapters of the trilogy, and that would be telling more of a much broader story. And then it would conclude with like a sadder play that would be more like a comedic, I don't know, a comedic ending or something that, I don't know how relevant it was to the actual trilogy of the play, because we don't really have any surviving, not in their entirety at least. So we only have this one trilogy, and I really did enjoy this. This is the translation I read, which was by Alan Shapiro and Peter Buren, and I really did enjoy this translation. I thought actually that this translation was what it was trying to go for was really well done. It was it was combining a poet, which is Alan Shapiro, with scholarship from Peter Buren, and that's the whole line here says the Greek tragedy in new translations, which they've done in many different works. This is the only volume I have in that line, but I think they do a really good job of at least translating the work, making it compelling in English translation, which is not the case for a lot of, say, older Penguin Classic translations of tragedies. I've found those to be fairly dull, but translations like this have really brought out part of the reason why these were so popular and so why they've endured for so long. And then we have more Aeschylus. This is the exact same work. This is the Oresteia, but this is in a different translation. This is the Hackett translation done by Peter Maynek, and I've not actually read this volume. I actually picked this up, I think, after I read this volume here, but it's a different translation, a more modern one, I think, or maybe they were done at the same time, 1998. Yeah, I think it was around the same time as this, but as you see, it has a much different kind of flavor for the cover here. This one goes for the ancient Greek look, and this one goes for more of a modern feel to it with a war celebration. Let's see here. I'm still not even on the shelf proper, so this video might go for quite some time. We go back to another historian. This is a Greek historian, but was well entrenched in Roman times. This is Polybius. This is the rise of the Roman Empire, and this is a generous selection of his works, but I think there's more. I don't know if this translates the entirety of his work, and I don't think they publish another volume of Polybius, so this is all we got, at least in the Penguin Classic line. And this is done by F.W. Wallbank. He's the introducer. The translator is Ian Scott Kilvert, who we've seen before, and this is Polybius, who writes Roman history, but as a Greek native, and I don't really know much more than that, because this is a Greek history figure that I really, in my mind, I kind of just put him in Roman literature, even though he himself is not a native Roman, so I don't know much more about that history than that. And then we move on to a Greek anthology. This is the Greek literature, a Penguin Classic anthology. This is the editor here is Michael Grant, who's has his fingers all over Penguin Classics when it comes to ancient Greek and Roman literature, and it just includes tons of different selections of poets and some drama and philosophers, and all through different ages, including works that we don't have in their entirety. So we have selections here of Heliodorus and Longus and Xenophon of Ephesus, different characters that we don't have their works in their entirety. I'm pretty sure Sappho makes an appearance here too. Yes, that's true. But yeah, I have not gone through this at all. I don't really know how I would go through this in its entirety. Maybe as like a bedside table type thing where I would pick this up and read selections here and there. But I'm not really all that interested at this moment. It's just nice to have translated works by Greek writers that we do not have in their entirety and that don't have their own Penguin Classic volume. So that's the main reason why I have that. And then we move back to a work I have read. This is Aesop, The Complete Fables, and it's hard to make that claim that you have the complete Aesop's Fables. I'll say the translator here, it's translated by Olivia and Robert Temple. And the reason why it's so hard to say you have the complete fables is because Aesop was like this name in which all these fables kind of got stuck under. So we don't even know much about Aesop as a historical figure or whether he was just legend. Sort of like how Homer is like the name that we include the Homeric, what we now have as the Homeric works of literature, like the Odyssey and the Iliad. The Aesop is kind of like the catch-all term for fables that have survived throughout the ages, and they're all very short. Like this is a fable here and another fable here, and they usually include animals and a moral at the very end. So they're very short. They have like a deliberate point to them, and they don't have much more than that. The interesting thing is that they translate the fable, and then in the manuscript tradition they have morals at the end, like explaining what the tale is about or what the tale is supposed to bring your attention to. And for example, this one here says, "This fable shows that it is not always necessary to confine ourselves to to the same tactics, but on the contrary, if we are adaptable to circumstances, we can better escape danger." So, just things like that. The annoying thing about this volume, I did read this entire volume, the annoying thing about it is that there is no index. The last page here is just another fable, and then it ends. There's no index at the very end where you can look for certain fables based on, say, like, whether or not there's a fox. So all the tales with the fox would have their own an index, and then I can compare, like, say, maybe I want the one with a fox and a snake, or maybe the fox and the grapes. I can't look for that in here because there's no table of contents and there's no index. And the number system in here is very arbitrary. So they're all numbered. There's over 300 in here. 356 or 58 fables in here. And virtually every other version of Aesop will have a different numbering and a different selection. There is, of course, overlap, because this one will include more than the average Aesop collection, but still, it's very annoying that it can't really be used as a reference volume unless you're willing to flip through the entire thing and try to find what you're looking for, which is not all that easy to do. But anyways, rant aside, I'll continue with this shelf, and then we move on to everyone's favorite, philosophy. This is Aristotle's Ethics, I have 3 volumes of this, and I might as well actually show them off right away, because they're all here. So I have 3 volumes of Aristotle's Ethics. This is the Penguin version, done by J.A.K. Thompson. And then we have the Oxford edition, done by David Ross. This is the revised with notes and an introduction by Leslie Brown, and that's the Oxford edition. And then I have the Hackett edition. This is Terence Irwin, his volume of Aristotle's Ethics, and I read the Ethics in this volume here. This is the Penguin volume, and not in these 2 volumes. And there was a reason for that. I wanted to read the Terence Irwin's Hackett edition, but this version is very much for someone who's an undergraduate who's going to be studying this in detail and probably writing an essay. So the translation is very literal, but then like half the volume here is just endnotes. I think, let's see, actually more than half of this volume is endnotes. I'm trying to find where the notes end. Here we go. If you see that here, all this extra work here is just critical notes on the work of Aristotle. And this volume here is a revised version of a classic translation of the Ethics. And I liked this edition, but I didn't end up reading this one. I just ended up, I used this one as a comparison volume a lot, so if this was not very clear in the translation, or if I thought maybe it was too loose as a translation, or too modernizing as a translation, I went to this volume to try to compare it. And I thought that was a lot of fun, because this volume is very much meant for as an introduction to Aristotle and his work, because it's put into sections here, so you have all these headings here that are not in the original, different chapter headings. You got footnotes all at the bottom instead of at the very back, and the most helpful thing, I think this one has it, I guess not. Sometimes Penguin does little summaries, but they also do little illustrations like that. So this one I thought was very much meant for beginners. It's not the most literal translation, and it does take liberties, which you kind of have to do if you're translating Aristotle for a non-scholarly audience who won't be studying this academically, but who wants to read the work and get the gist of what's going on. And I thought this one was very good at that, which is the reason why I read it first. And I'll go back to these 2 volumes when I revisit Aristotle's Ethics in a little bit more detail. And then continuing on the theme of Aristotle, we have his Politics. This is the Penguin version again, and then I also have this version of the Politics. This is by Ernest Barker, the Oxford version here, and then this is the Penguin version done by T.A. Sinclair, revised and re-represented by Trevor Saunders. And I had this volume first, and I intended to read this volume when I read the Politics, but then I went to the Penguin for the same reason why I went to the Penguin for the Ethics. The only difference is that this volume includes not just all these headings and stuff, but this all here is an introductory note. So this is section 3, and it has justice and sovereignty, and he'll give us this in italicized summary of the argument, which goes on to the next page here. It finishes over here, and then you actually get Aristotle's work here. And he does that all throughout the Politics, where we have this, page and a half summary of the chapter, and then the actual translation itself. And I really like that approach. I think that approach is very helpful for a beginner like me when I'm approaching these works. This work had a lot of that too, but it also, and just tons of notes and stuff, and like extra material. So like this was his summary here, and then we have notes and all this different stuff. But the problem is that this work was published in the 1940s, and the audience, the level of intelligence of an audience in the 1940s, say an undergraduate who's going to be studying the work, is different than even someone in, let me guess, the 50s or the 70s. Can I? 1950s is when this was originally published, but the revisions were done in the 60s, I think. I don't know. So 20 years later, this was a different approach, and more. This one is geared towards undergraduates who are somewhat familiar with Greek. This one is done for a general audience who would not be familiar with Greek or with Aristotle to begin with. So that's why I went for the Penguin. And I'm getting quite windy here, and I'm at 30 minutes, and I'm not even on the shelf proper. So this one might be a long video, unless I break it up into two. But then we move on to, I should continue with Aristotle, because I do have Aristotle here. This is De Anima on the Soul, and this is the only copy that I have of this, of On the Soul, and this I thought was actually terrible. It's translated by Hugh Lawson Tancred, and this translation was incredibly clunky, and the introduction, like the work itself is like 100 pages, and the introduction to this volume is like 100 pages. Let me see if I can show you. Yeah, the introduction here. 100 pages for the introduction, and then another 100 pages for the work itself. And it was so clunky, so dense, that it actually made me quite upset at the author, because he has this mind of, I'm going to be translating this for a general audience, and then he remembers that for maybe another page or two, and then he completely gets lost into academic arguments and interpretations of Aristotle's De Anima, and I was so lost in the translation that, and even though he does again have summaries here, but I found the summaries were not all that more enlightening than the actual translation. I was completely lost about what was going on here. And I believe this was the first work of Aristotle that I tried reading because it's so short. So this was not a good start to reading Aristotle, and I was disappointed at that. And I would not recommend this translation if you want to read this work. I'm sure there's a public domain translation of this on Project Gutenberg which will do you better, because this version is very much deep in the weeds and very much a literal translation. So definitely do not recommend. And then we have this vein of Plato. So we start off with Plato's The Last Days of Socrates. This is the best volume to get if you want an introductory volume to Plato. This is translated by Hugh Tredennick, and it includes the Euthyphro, the Apology, Crito, and the Phaedo. And Euthyphro, Apology, and Crito are like basically short story length, and then the Phaedo is about 100 pages, which takes the bulk of this volume. And they're all based on the last days of Socrates, so before he was convicted in his trial and was forced to commit suicide, so to take the Hemlock Cup. And I thought it's an interesting volume to have, and a great place to start if you want to read Plato. And then we go back to the other two works of Plato here. This is Plato's Gorgias or Georgius. I never heard how this should be pronounced. Is it Georgius or Gorgias? Either way, I'm probably saying it wrong. And this is just a slim work, about 100 pages as well. Or just, okay, maybe more than that. 130 pages. And it's basically, well, my view of this is that it's the Republic Light. So it includes a lot of the discussions in here will go on to be fleshed out in the Republic. Like views of like authoritarianism and power and ruling and whatnot. They are scratched at here, but they're not really fulfilled until you get to Plato's Republic. And I guess I should say this translation here is done by Walter Hamilton and Chris Emmelyn Jones, and this translation here is done by Desmond Lee. And this is like their classic translation that they've had since the 50s, and it does exactly what those volumes of those Penguin volumes of Aristotle do. So then you have divided into chapter headings, which is not in the original, and then a summary in italics of what you're going to be reading about, and then you get the actual translation itself. The translation of this one is really good. I had no problems with this translation, and I thought this was easy to get through, or fairly easy to get through, and of course anything by Plato is easier to get through than Aristotle. So, but as a work itself, I didn't really get the hype, probably because I didn't understand it, but also because it seemed very archaic to me, which is of course going to happen if you're reading a work from, 3,000 years ago or whatever, 2,500 years ago. It's going to feel old. But I found like this felt like it was a lot more. It didn't seem to age a whole that well, considering that there's philosophers and professors who claim that this is an ever-enduring work that asks questions that we still can't answer to this day, and I find that, I don't know, like this book is overrated, like it's overpraised, but I'm totally willing to admit that that could very well be me. It's just that I didn't find it all that interesting at the moment, so we'll see if that changes. And then we'll go on to this Norton work here. This is the Norton Book of Classical Literature, another anthology, and this is edited by Bernard Knox, and it's much bigger. So we have classical literature. This includes Greek and Roman, though I believe that the emphasis is on Roman literature here, because that was, well, maybe not. We got selections from Homer, classical we got archaic Greek lyrics. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the opposite. Maybe it is focused more on Greeks than on Romans. The Roman section only starts at page 600 and goes on to page 800. So yeah, this looks like it actually focuses on Greeks far more than on the Romans, which is interesting. And I have not really gone to this all that much, but I found it used for very cheap, and it's completely unmarked, so I might as well give it a try and maybe dip into it now and then, but I've not been tempted to anytime soon. We're almost at 40 minutes, and I still haven't gotten to the shelf proper. I don't know if I should divide this into two and just do the shelf, the main shelf separately, or if I should try to barrel through it now. You know what? I think I'm gonna wait. Because the shelf is still very full, and I might get very chatty again when it comes to talking about some of this other work. So I'll leave it there for now, BookTube, and I'll see you next time.